My goodness, I've never walked in a room and gotten applause before. Now, I see, oh, there is one gentleman here, and actually 2 gentlemen. And do you separate your males from your females when you have gatherings like this? Ah, but there is such a difference here. Why is that? What did you say, madam?
That would be a good idea.
Very often it does happen in my time. Now, my name is Abigall Mitchell. For me, the year is 1771, and I am a very unusual woman for a very specific reason from this time period. And I'm going to, everything that we do today, I like to see it as more of a conversation than me presenting things to you, because I want you to be able to ask questions as we go along and we can discuss things, so that I'm talking about things that you are interested in rather than just telling you things that you may or may not want to hear about. So I've got lots to talk about, but at any point that you have questions as we go along, feel free to raise them. And after I'll speak for, or we'll have our conversation for about 45 minutes or so, and then the woman who created me, Gail Shearer, will be joining us, and at that point you can ask her questions from the modern day. I will answer things from my period in 1771 as we go along. So every now and then, if you ask something that I am not able to answer, I'll tell you to save that until Gail joins us a little bit later. Now, on this table, I have a lot of the hints that of why I am such an unusual person for my period. Would anybody care to venture a guess as to why I am unusual? Pardon me?
You're a writer.
I am. I am able to write and to read. And for a woman, wealthy or not, during this period, that is very unusual. Most of the people who have a very good education during this time period are wealthy and male. But I was very, very fortunate. I come from a family, my mother was from a Dutch heritage. And my great-grandmother was the first one in my mother's line to come over to this land from the Netherlands back in, I don't recall the exact year, in the 1650s or 1660s, I believe, she came over here. And when she came here, she was but 22 years old, and she came by herself on a ship with many other people, but nobody accompanying her or chaperoning her. Now, the British, when she arrived here, thought that that was very odd and very disgraceful. A young woman should never go adventuring on her own. But to the Dutch people, women or young girls were just as likely, well, probably not just as likely, but very likely to go on adventures just like young men would. And it wasn't thought to be inappropriate at all. So my great-grandmother came here, as I mentioned, when she was but 22, and she became a trader on Wall Street, one of 17 women traders on Wall Street. And a lot of people think, oh, women never did those kinds of things back then. Ah, but that was when the colony of New York, which is where I'm from, was under the control of another country. And what country do you think that would be, other than Britain? The Netherlands, indeed. The Netherlands, and during the time that it was under the control of the Netherlands, it was called New Netherlands. And the city, which is now New York City, was then called New Amsterdam. And under the Dutch rule, Dutch people thought it was very important that everyone, male or female, rich or poor, get a good education. So they had very strong educational programs for children. They also had something that my great-grandmother made me very aware of. I never met her, but I have read her journals and have a lot of her possessions that I can share with you. When she first arrived in New Netherlands, as I mentioned, she was a trader on Wall Street, And she arrived unmarried. Eventually, she met a nice Dutch man and married him. And at that time, she kept her maiden name, which is a custom of the Dutch, going way back then. I know some people in your time period, women will keep their own maiden names and not take their husband's names. And everybody talks about it as though it's this new thing. But it really goes back several hundred years in some societies. And so when she got here, she married her husband, and then by the time she died, the colony of New York, or the colony of New Netherlands, had been traded to the British. They traded it for a colony in South America. I won't get into all the explanations, but if you look up a little bit of history about the time period, you'll see that this trade was sort of a way to prevent a war or any kind of skirmish or armed disagreement. And so the Dutch then took over Suriname in North and South America, and the British took over the colony of New York, the colony of New Netherlands, and then named it New York. Now, under the British rule, it started off slowly at first. Rights started being taken away from mostly women. A lot of the laws would change, became the British laws, which were different than the Dutch laws. But when the British took over, they were taking away rights, but not so much from the men. So the men didn't object very strongly, but the women found themselves losing the right to own property, losing the right to sue or be sued personally. Women had not very many choices under the British on what they were going to do if they needed to support themselves. Now keep in mind, and you may be very well aware of this, that most of the jobs that were available for women, there were a few, but most of them were filled by unmarried women who had to support themselves. Perhaps their husband had died, because without that kind of support, usually women could be left destitute, even if they had come from a wealthier background. And so women had to be really careful. Now, my great-grandmother wrote about these things, and she said she thought that education was going to be the secret to being able to come up in life and support yourself unless or until you find a husband, if you do. Because when I was under my father's care, he owned all my property when I was growing up. And then when I got married, the first time, I've been married twice, and the first time I got married, my husband died not too long after we had married in a horseback riding accident. And he did not have a will. And the only reason that I knew about a law that was true in the colony of New York, and keep in mind, the colonies all had their own governments and considered themselves independent countries, independent states that worked with one another. And so the laws might be different from one place to another. And when the people, let's see, where was I going with this? I do tend to lose my train of thought a little bit sometimes. When the colony started taking all the rights away from women, my great-grandmother made a real effort of making sure that all of her daughters and her granddaughters and eventually, hopefully, her great-granddaughters would be educated very well, and it would have to be at home because now the only schools were for wealthier people. And I'm told that they do have schools for girls. I've never been to one of them. But the schools for girls are focused on things like learning how to do the most elegant popular dances, or things like learning a foreign language, which can be a very good asset. There's nothing wrong with that. Or things like learning how to play a musical instrument, or how to do fine needlework. But they didn't cover things like mathematics, or science, or geography, or those things that I feel, and my mother, and my grandmother, and my great-grandmother all felt were very valuable for women to know. And I have proof of this because when my first husband did die, it was a sad thing. I didn't mean to smile at that. But when he died, we had no children, he had no relatives in this country, and he died intestate without a will. And so I happened to know, because I had been reading some law books in the stationer's shop. The stationer is a friend of mine, and the stationer's shop is where you might find some books. I could not afford to buy books. We were not wealthy, but the stationer often would loan them to me as long as I was careful. And so I would read some of the law books, and I knew about a law that the wealthy men who were familiar with it weren't about to share. And that law said, if a woman that's already moved from her father's house has a husband and that husband dies and there are no relatives, no will, then the woman can own his property. And the woman can, we have a lot of rights during that time period. So that was very fortunate for me, because it took a number of years before I met the second man that I ended up marrying. And so I have tried to pass on those skills of being able to read and write to my children and my grandchildren, just like my mother and grandmother did to me. And that's what makes me such an unusual person. My mother was very good at reading and writing, so I am very skilled at reading and writing. And I understand in the girls' schools, they do cover a little bit of writing so one can correspond with distant relatives. And they do cover a little bit of reading, but the only appropriate reading is one's Bible. And I rather like books like Gulliver's Travels and things like that, that young girls are not supposed to be reading. And so I feel very, very fortunate for getting this really rich education based on my Dutch great-grandmother. Yes?
How did your great-grandmother get the job with the Wall Street, which I didn't even know it existed at that time?
Yes, it did.
And how did she, as a woman in that particular era, get that job?
She came over, her uncle in New Netherlands had an agent working on Wall Street for him, who it turns off was stealing from him. And so my uncle asked her uncle asked his niece to come over and represent him instead of this man that was working there. So there was always already a position available, and he hired her to do this. And she did it for a number of years until the British took over, and she was no longer allowed to be a trader on Wall Street. So, any other questions so far? No?
What ship did she come over on?
That I don't know. I don't know. I did never meet her, and so all the answers that I have are what I found in her journals, and she never wrote about those kinds of things. All right. Anything else as we go along? Now, I've got a number of things here with regards to both my, my skill of reading and writing that I wanted to share a little bit with you, and I've also got a number of other things. So as we go along, feel free to ask me about things about the reading and writing, and I will pass things around as long as, when you're done looking at them, as long as they come back up here, that's perfectly fine. I'm sure that probably most of you, and some of you may have even used this as a child just for fun. I'm certain that you are beyond the age that you use this as a common instrument. But what would this be then? A quill, yes, indeed. And now, do you know what kind of quills were used in the colony? What kind of feathers? What birds contributed their feathers to being quills? The most desirable. Goose is one of them, indeed, yes. Anyone have another guess? Turkey. Those were the two most common during this time period. Now there have been steel nibs, the points that you write with, that can be put on a stylus, that they're starting to manufacture. They do not work well because they don't have the ability yet to make the nib very fine, and so it scratches the paper. It just doesn't write smoothly. So I much prefer still using a quill pen. And I do cut my quills myself, although as I've gotten older, as some of you might be able to relate to, I have gotten a bit of a shaky hand, and my quill cutting ability is not nearly so fine as it used to be. So now if I want a really finely cut quill, I have to ask my son, who lives with me back in the colony, to cut it for me. He is quite skilled at it. So now, over in Europe, They have different birds that they use for quills. Did you know that when the Europeans came to this land, they had never experienced turkey before? Because turkey were native to here, but not to Europe. And so turkey was a brand new bird, a brand new food, a brand new source of quills. And so they didn't use turkeys over in Europe, even after they started taking birds back over there to expose the Europeans to the birds. I'm not aware of them using them for quills. They did use goose quills over in Europe, but what is the other bird other than turkey? They had two primary birds that they got their quills from, and I'll give you a clue. This is a bird from one of those. Pardon me?
Gull?
No, bigger, much bigger. Yes. Any ideas? Yes, indeed, a swan quill. Now, before I got this, I had always heard that swans made the finest quills that you could ever find, and that they wrote much nicer. And I had never experienced that. And when I was corresponding with a friend of mine who lives in England, and I asked her, do you think that swan quills make the finest quills? And she said, oh, yes, indeed, I do. And then several months later, I got a box in the mail about this long, and I wasn't sure what it was. And I opened it up, and there were several swan feathers that she had sent to me. Now, when Gail comes in later, you'll have to ask her to explain a little bit about the difficulty that I had in being able to use a swan quill. I had to do a lot of research before I could start using this and presenting it to you. In my time period, it wouldn't be any problem, but in your time period, it's a little bit different. So be sure and ask her about that when she comes. Any questions? Oh, you all are so polite and quiet, but don't even give me a chance to have a drink of water every now and then. Oh, and by the way, thank you very much for showing up on such a warm day. This is much warmer than I was expecting in what would be the Illinois territory in my time period. Now, does anyone have any idea what kind of ink is used in this period? There are many, many, many different kinds of ink people can make at their own homes if there are writers. But there are two that are the most commonly used. Anyone have any ideas? There is one called oak gall ink, and that is not one that I make myself because I don't collect the galls myself, but I do have a gentleman who does make the oak gall ink, and he does it in a powdered form that I can add it to water or to wine. The wine is supposed to make it a little bit shiny, which looks a little bit fancy, some people think. But the other kind of ink that I use that is what I've got here, and this is the kind that I make, is from, the big trees with the big green, no. No. No, they've got the big green fruit that falls and you can't get in. It's a nut.
Walnut.
Yes, black walnut. Every now and then my brain just goes and I cannot find what I'm looking for in there. So I use black walnuts. Now, I told a neighbor that I was looking to make black walnut, and I didn't have any black walnut trees on my property, so I asked my neighbor if they minded me coming over and collecting some black walnuts to make. And they said, there's no problem at all. And they brought over a big sack full of black walnuts, and they said, oh, and we picked out the very best ones, the ones that were still green and whole. That's not what I needed. I need the rotten, nasty ones. They're all crawling with bugs. So I just left that bag out for several weeks, and the nuts started to rot. And that's what I needed. After all their work to find the best ones, that was funny. And so what I do then, and this is, I have something, let's see, it's a stiffness in my joint. I don't recall what you call it, where it makes it difficult to move. Oh, that's it, yes, yes. And so that's just pain in my joints is what I would call it, but I know that you all have a name for it. And so this has gotten harder to make, but this is something you could also do. I've got a lot of ideas of things you can do with young children if you have any grandchildren or neighbors that you'd like to do things with. And you take the black walnuts, you let them rot. I would put them and cover them in water and just let them rot for, it can be months. I've got some now that has been stewing for probably 3 or 4 years, so it'll be really nice. So the nature is doing a lot of the work for me. I don't have to do as much. It's difficult to get in a black walnut if you've ever tried to get in one, and then it turns your hands all brown and takes a while for that to go away. So what I do after it's all rotten, I take the nut part out. We don't need that. But don't do what my mother did when I was a little child. She took the black walnuts and buried them, and the squirrels all found them, so they planted them all around. And I don't know how much you know about black walnut, but you want to be careful about having them because other things don't like what their root system puts out, so if the other things won't grow near them. And so we spent many days. We left one black walnut on our property when I was a child, but we spent many days digging up all the others that the squirrels had buried. So don't bury them. And then I would take all of the other solid matter and boil it away. It smells kind of earthy. I kind of like the smell, but not everybody does. And so it's something, if you want to do it, I would recommend doing it outside over the fire so your whole house does not smell like black walnut. Then I would boil it down until it got almost to the point of black. Then I run it through cloth and squeeze it out, and that's the part that's so hard on my hands. After I've done this, because I'll make a whole lot of several. I start off with several gallons and it gets down to several quarts by the time I'm done boiling it. I squeeze all that out, and then I can just throw away all of the solid matter that's left, and I will add a little bit of something called gum arabic to what the liquid is. Now, my mother did teach me about geography a little bit and a lot about reading and writing, a bit about mathematics, but my mother was not too knowledgeable about science, so I don't quite understand the science of it. But people tell me that gum arabic was something that had two purposes. It allowed the ink to flow more smoothly on the paper, and it also allowed it to attach to the paper a little bit better. And now we're using paper that's, in my period, that's made from flax fiber, most of it. But before, as you might be aware, a lot of the time sheepskin or other animal skin was used, and that vellum has a hard time absorbing the ink, and so that's where the gum arabic was supposed to help out. And I noticed that every recipe I ever saw that had, for ink, always had gum arabic, no matter what the coloring was. And so that's what I've used. And a lot of people feel that black writing is a lot more beautiful than brown writing. Now, I personally disagree, but if somebody wanted to make black writing, my black walnut gets to a dark brown, but if I wanted to make it black, I would put an iron nail in there when I'm boiling it, or maybe a few, and that blackens it up. But I leave mine brown because I like that color. It's a very rich, nice color. In fact, I've used it sometimes to dye some of my clothing that I've got. Any questions? No?
You know, speaking of clothing,
Yes.
Where do you buy the cloth to make your outfits?
Well, I would go to the milliner's shop or one of the shops in Albany. I don't live in Albany any longer. I live just west on what is now the frontier of Albany, but that's where I would buy it. And if you want to know about in modern times, ask Gail about that when she comes in, and she can inform you about where you can find the period appropriate fabric during your time period as well. But I do make all my own clothing. Now that's something that's kind of interesting because many of the fashions, many of the styles that we wear are the same between rich and poor. Now I'm not poor, but I'm definitely not rich. I would be considered sort of a midland sort. And I'm not sure how to explain that in your modern culture. I would say probably midland sort, somebody like me would probably be in what you might call the middle class, or maybe the lower middle class, something around there. So not wealthy, but I am comfortable. I'm not starving. I am getting by. And my reading and writing, that's where, there's another little story that I've got about that. I have a neighbor who was very wealthy. She was widowed quite young, and all of her children died before she did. And her visions started going, and she and I had become, had spoken together about planting things, about some of the crops we were growing, as well as some of the flowers that she had. So we had become friends. And when her eyes started going, she said the thing she missed most of all was reading, because she was also a reader. So she would ask me to come over and read for her. And so in doing so, she didn't pay me to do this. This was after I was done raising my family, and my son and I are living together. And so the household is very calm now compared to when I was younger. And so I would go over and read to her, and she would give me things like, the silk ribbon that I use for my hats or my clothing. She gave me silk ribbon pieces. And then she lost a lot of weight. And she and I, her form used to be about the same shape as mine. So she gave me some of her silk gowns. I could never afford silk on my own. And that's something that's rather interesting. What do you suppose the most common type of fabric that's used in the summertime might be in the late colonial period? Any ideas?
Muslin,
Linen, exactly. Because isn't muslin made out of cotton? And cotton can be just as expensive as silk during this period. Linen is very inexpensive, and in fact, when they started the Townshend Acts and the Stamp Act and all these things where we were having to pay taxes to the British government without having any say in how it was spent, which was quite troubling, and that's still going on right now. And when that happened, we started raising a lot of flax in this country, because that's something we could grow here. I'm not aware, most of the cotton at this time period still comes to us imported by Britain from India. And so that, all the taxes and everything, bringing that across the sea raises the price of both cotton and, of course, of silk. And so someone like me wears primarily linen. Now, do you all know what the raw linen fibers look like? Have you ever seen those? I believe the only problem with my desk here is that I have to move my things to get my drawer open. This is flax, and it's very, very strong. You probably have some of this in your pocket. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? It's been processed. What did you say? Oh. Perhaps, but this does not form lint as much or as badly as cotton will. But there's something that you might have if you go out to the store that you would need to use before you could leave the store if you're buying anything. Yes, your money is made out of combination, I am told, flax fibers or linen fibers and cotton. I don't know what the mixture is, I'm not certain. And that's why if you wash something and you have money in your pocket, that it doesn't, if you had other kind of paper in your pocket, it would probably disintegrate when you're washing it. But with linen, it stays mostly in place. It won't tear up as easily as a cotton would. And so this is very, very strong, and the fibers are very, very long. You can see this is doubled over, whereas the cotton fibers, even the longer kind of cotton fibers, are very short compared to this. It's a little bit rougher on the hands when I'm doing things, sewing or that kind of thing. And I've learned to spin, but I never got to be very good at it. So I'm not the best example of spinning. But this is the kind of fiber that would be used in the summertime, not only by the not so wealthy folk, but also wealthy people might use this as well. And what would be the typical fiber or kind of fabric that we would use in the wintertime, do you suppose? Wool, definitely, yes. And that's another thing that we could raise and process ourselves here in the colonies. And very often, women would get to know each other by coming together and spinning together, or cleaning the wool together, or a lot of different steps involved in the processing that would allow us to join together, which is why we've become very aware of what's going on politically in 1771 and really kind of troubled by it. Have any of you, I saw somebody who looked like they had a question. Was that?
Tell me, the flax is a plant.
Yes.
And that comes from what part of the plant?
This, great question. And I'm not going to try and untie this. It comes a tall plant like this, and on the outside is very I don't know all the terminology, but the woody kind of husk that goes around it. And so inside, this is the inside of the stalk, or it's going to grow straight up. And this is the inside. So the first step would be to put it in a thing where you have a piece of wood that comes down, and it's called the breaker. And that would break up all that wooden stuff on the outside, and you take that off, and then you have this fiber on the inside. So, great question. Anything else while we're paused? No? Now, let's see here. I find it very interesting. I'm told that in your time period, cotton can be very inexpensive, and linen is very expensive. And so I find it interesting how things change over time to just the opposite of what they used to be. And the reasoning behind that is just fascinating to me. Now, let's see here. Reading is something that I love to do when I have spare time. And I do have a lot more time now that I don't have any young children at home or anybody to worry about. My son takes care of me more than I take care of him now. Now, have any of you ever read an old book that at the bottom of one page, there will be the first word on the next page? Have you ever seen an old book like that? Many old books, even people have shown me old books from your period that go back to the early 1900s and middle 1900s that still have a word at the bottom of one page and the same word at the top of the next. Does anyone have a guess as to why they might do that?
So the pages don't get mixed up?
Exactly. When the printer prints it out, there's several pages, and they have to be folded in the right way to go into the book, and then they are cut. And so this book is a book from my period that was made and bound by the same process that we use in my period, which I think is a little different than your process. And so all of at the bottom of one page is the first word on the next page. It also helps when I'm reading to kind of allow me to continue, especially if I'm flipping a page and I can't quite grasp the page. I've got the first word in my mind, and so it helps me carry over to the next page. Now, I have to tell you, this is a book. This is called Pamela, and it is, let's see here. We have the frontispiece page. Yes, Samuel Richardson. Has anyone ever heard of Samuel Richardson? He's a very popular writer in the 18th century. And he wrote this book called Pamela, Virtue Rewarded. And this story is about a young girl who is orphaned, and she's living, I believe, with her uncle. It's been a while since I've read it. And he is her guardian. Now, she faces a lot of difficulties, including with her uncle, about retaining her virtue. She is doing everything she can to retain her virtue. She finally has to leave the home where her guardian is, and she has all these adventures, but she's always confronting, usually men, who are challenging her virtue and trying to take advantage of her. In the end, she ends up keeping her virtue, and so the subtitle of this is Virtue Rewarded. Now, this came out, I don't recall the year. Let me see here. 1769, I believe, 1769. And shortly after this came out, there was another gentleman whose name I cannot recall, who wrote a book called Shamala instead of Pamela, taking the name Shame and putting it with Pamela. She was not such a good girl. Now, I do not know if this is true, but I have been told that that book sold far better than this one did. However, this is one that my father would have let me read, whereas Shamala he would have definitely disapproved of. And feel free to pass this around. I have a couple.
Question about your book.
Uh-huh.
I was reading your book, and I noticed words that had the letter S in them was an F.
Yes, it looks like an F. It is not, however, and let me show you. I'm so glad you asked that. Let me see if I have a piece of paper large enough. I don't have any kind of board to demonstrate on. I heard somebody say something. Do you have a piece of paper that I could use, please? I've got small pieces of paper, but not large ones. Oh, that would be fine. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to show you the difference. What you're talking about in the English language in the 18th century, we still use a letter that we get from the Germanic languages, and that's called the long S. And we also have a short S. The short S, both in printing and in cursive, looks just like your modern day S. But the long S looks very much like an F, and people get mixed up. But there's a tiny little difference, and it depends on the publisher. The book that is being passed around, there are some, well, I'll explain that in a moment. Going to see how this works, doing it up in the sky here. All right, so now, can everybody sort of see here? I'm going to give myself a backing. All right, for the F and for the long S, I start up like that and come down. So they're exactly the same through this. Now, an F, I would take it like this and go like that. But for the S, I go backwards and up. That's the only difference in the cursive. Speaking of which, I wouldn't call this cursive. This to me is handwriting, and printing is something that happens in a book. But I know that you distinguish between how you write. My mother, when she was teaching me how to write, I learned in what you would call cursive. I don't know if this happens in all families or if that's how they do it in the boys' schools where they're teaching writing, but that's how I learned. And so in the book that's being passed around, and I think all of these are perhaps printed in the same place. Many of them were printed in Williamsburg, which has a very a print shop that is distributed. Their printings and books and periodicals and things like that are distributed throughout the colonies. And some printers will show the F with, if it's what you would call a print. So there's the main stem, and some printers for the long S will have nothing across there. It won't have a crossbar. And other printers for the long S will have a tiny little crossbar, and then when it's an F, they'll have a tiny little crossbar on both sides instead of one side. But it's so tiny, it's very difficult to see. So the easiest thing, if you're reading things from years ago, it could be probably, I think the long S continued to be used about halfway through the 1800s, I believe is what I've heard. Now it stops being taught once the new country is starting to take charge of language and spelling and making things more consistent. But I've lost my train of thought again. What was I saying? I need your help. Good heavens. My mind keeps slipping. I think I may be losing a little bit of my mind. What?
The change of printing?
Oh, yes. But many people like me who had been living and using the long S all their lives, they continued to use it, and so it kind of took, as many changes will take a long time to kind of make the full change. So I think from my understanding of what I've been told, they stopped teaching it early on in the 1800s, but then it stops appearing in printed matter and written matter by the middle of the century. So, yes?
So is there a different in pronunciation, the long S?
That's a great question, and I've been told that in German there is, but in English there is not. And I found two different sets of rules about when to use the long S and when to use the short S. Those two different sets contradict each other. They don't, and I've examined many documents from this time period. And there are just as many people that follow some of the rules as break the rules. I've never seen a single rule, except for one, that everybody always follows all the time. That one rule that I've never seen broken says if the last letter in the word is an S, then it should be a short S. So the one like your modern day S. But a lot of the time, one of the rules says when you have a double S, one should be long and one should be short, and I can't remember which is which. And the other rule says if you have a double S, they should both be long. So people, remember, during this time period, the first dictionary of the English language came out in about, I believe it was 1755. Samuel Johnson came out with this dictionary. By that time, I had been writing and reading my whole life, and dictionaries are very expensive. So why would I pay to have a dictionary to do something that I've always done? And so I just continue to use spelling the way that I spell things. And it's funny because sometimes you'll see a document where the same word is spelled 3 different ways on a same page. And other documents where it's very consistent. It all depends on the person. Now, somebody who is a scribe would be somebody who might be hired to do like a broadside to be posted up in the town, things like that, and they would handwrite that as opposed to printing it. And if they're handwriting it, then they would be highly trained, and they would have more consistent spelling, and they would have more consistent manuscript, and they take a lot longer. What I do is not at that level at all. What I do, I would call functional writing, because it can be read, and I'm proud that I can do it, but it's not something that, that everybody is paying me for. So I'm not a writer for my living. I am a writer in my ability to write. All right? And now, has anyone in here ever heard of Poor Richard's Almanac?
Yes.
Okay, and do you know who Poor Richard is?
Ben Franklin.
Yes, Ben Franklin was Poor Richard. And I know about him because my mother told me that it was Mr. Franklin that was writing these things. But I don't know how commonly it was known that he did write these. And he has a lot of aphorisms or sayings that are attributed to him. A stitch in time saves 9, things like that. That I understand he's attributed to all those, with coming up with all those because he put them in Poor Richard's Almanac. But he didn't necessarily think of all of those because apparently he had been collecting these sayings for many years and he just used them. But since he was the first one to put it out there for the public, then he gets the credit for them. And I do have a copy of that if you would like to pass it around. And I also have a copy of something called A Modest Proposal. Now, you'll see that these little booklets, these are little pamphlets. But very often, when on the rare occasion that I would go and buy a book, I would buy it without the binding on it because the binding will add about 6 times the amount of the book cost to the total cost. And so the book that I have, I never had that bound myself. it was given to me as a gift to have that book bound. And I did get to go to the bookbinder and choose my paper that goes on the outside and choose the binding that goes on the spine of the book. And so it's got leather and it's got marbled paper. Are you familiar with marbled paper? And that's what's in there. I know when I was a child I was shown how to do marbled paper, and it's quite fascinating. Back to A Modest Proposal. This is a book by Jonathan Swift. Have you heard of Jonathan Swift? Yes. Now, Jonathan Swift had quite a sense of humor, and he was doing parodies very often, and somebody who was very familiar with Jonathan Swift would know that about him. But not everybody was that familiar with reading outside of what their required reading was, if they were a reader at all. So The Modest Proposal, there were problems going on in Ireland at this time, where there were young children in the streets who were beggar children, and it was a real problem. They were being blamed for crime, and I'm not from Ireland, so I don't know if they were actually guilty of it or if they were just somebody who others wanted to blame for these kinds of things. But there was all kind of discussion in Ireland about what to do about all of these children who were causing problems in the street and disrupting gentle society. So, and there were suggestions being made in the government there, and Jonathan Swift came out with this booklet. Now, when people read it, if you knew him, you got the wink in it. But if you didn't know him, you thought he was being taken, or he was quite serious about this. In A Modest Proposal, he doesn't get to the actual solution until the end. Has anybody ever read of this, or you're familiar with it? But you get hints all the way through that if you're very aware of it, you can pick up exactly where he's going with this information. Anyone want to take a guess at where he's going with it? Yeah, don't tell me if you know. Well, he talks in here about the difficulty and all the problems, but then he starts saying there's a perfect solution. You know, we can get them off the streets and deal with the issue of hunger amongst people who are not wealthy at the same time by just taking the children and eating them. Now, he was making fun of how ridiculous some of the proposals actually were of how to deal with this. He did in no way intended this to be real, but some people took him seriously. And so it's very interesting. And this one, on the title, you can see it looks like it says A Modest Proposal. You know, it looks like, because it uses that long S. So you can see how this printer only has the crossbar on one tiny little side of the long S. And then the last book that I have to pass around, and feel free to look through this, it's called The School of Manners, or Rules for Children Behavior. Now, these were used in the schools, the boys' schools, I'm told, and as I read through it, many of the rules, although they don't specify this, seem to apply just to males. And so my guess is that they were never used in the girls' schools. But very often, when modern-day children read some of these rules and figure out what it is that it's actually saying, they think, wow, I'm glad I didn't live back then, because I would have to follow all of these kinds of rules. There you go. Let's see here. Now, I have some stories to tell you about when I was a child. I told you that my mother taught us how to read and write at home. Well, my father was British. He was one of those British men that agreed with the British policy that said, no, you should not be educating your daughter, right. I don't know what's happening to me today. I don't know if it's the heat or what, but I'm forgetting my thoughts right in the middle of my sentence. So my father did not know that my mother was educating. He knew that she was educating my brother. I have one brother and two sisters. But he didn't know that my mother was educating the girls. And I was the oldest by quite a lot. There's a gap because there were several children that died between me and my next sister. But when my father became very, very ill, I don't remember what it was that he had. I think they called it consumption. He was ill, and then he was getting better from that, and he got ill with something else. I don't recall what. We've had so many diseases. It may have been smallpox. My father at one point did have smallpox. I don't remember if it was at this time. But my father had to go take to his bed. He was in no condition. He had a greengrocer shop in the town of Albany. And so when he was having to go to take himself to bed and couldn't work at his shop, we didn't know how we would survive because he was the only one that worked at his shop. And my mother couldn't go. She had young children at home that she was still taking care of. And so I said, Papa, I can go. And he says, but you cannot go. You cannot keep the accounts. You would not be able to do this and that. And I said, oh, but Papa, I can. And I showed him how I could write, and I showed him how I could figure my numbers. And he was very upset. But he knew he didn't have a choice because we were not rich enough to hire somebody to come in. And so for 3 months, while he was taken to bed, and we thought we would lose him, but we didn't, thankfully. And for 3 months, I ran the shop. And it was very interesting because after he was well enough to go back to his shop, and he came home that day and he said, well, I'm very upset that your mother did something that, I was not privy to. But he said, you had more of a profit on one of your months that you worked there than I've ever had in 1 month the whole time. And so after that, he let my mother teach my sisters at home. So we no longer had to tidy up our schooling before my father got home every day. We could do it in the evening when he was there. And that was a very nice thing. Oh, and another thing my father used to say before this happened, he used to say that if you find a good man, he'll never want to marry you if you're smart or if you can read and write. If you are more educated than he is, he will not be interested in you. And I said, Papa, Mama is far better educated than you are. Does that mean that you are not a good man? And he would just fold his arms and walk off because he knew I was right. And after this, he confessed that yes, I had been right the whole time. So that was a very delightful happenstance for me. Any questions as we're going along? No? Another thing, when I'm going, let's see here. When I'm going out, does anyone know what this thing is here?
It's a toy.
No, it's not a toy. What would you think it would be used for?
The kind where you put
that.
whatever this one is.
And there are those. We do have those toys, but this isn't one of them. This is something, what?
Drinking out of a well or something?
That's exact. Well, not necessarily a well, but it could be a well. But yes, if I go out walking and I'm not bringing things with me, I will just tuck this in. I would usually be wearing an apron, and I would tuck this in my apron string to keep it from going. And then when I get to a stream or a well or a lake or whatever, then I can dip this in and drink out of it. So this is called a noggin. And they're usually hand-carved, and they're usually pretty roughly carved. Because it's more of a function than it is for design. This is not something I would serve anything to anybody in my home with. So.
Did you have any pictures of her home, of your home?
Do I have? Well, there is a sketch that my brother did. My brother is an artist, and there is a sketch, but it is at home on the wall, and so I don't have it here with me. I did not bring it with me. Now, anybody want to take a guess at how many layers of fabric I've got on my body right now? At least from here to here. Not all parts of my body have all these layers. 4? 5? No. I have 9 layers of fabric on under this. And this is with most of it is linen, and so it's cooler than it would be in the winter time. But I have my underpinnings would be this shift. And so we have different terms. There's slightly different terms for different time periods, but they're also slightly different depending on what your heritage is. A person who is from French heritage would call this a chemise. We call it a shift in English. And so this is my only undergarment. I would use this to sleep in. I would use it to bathe in if I'm bathing out in public, like at a lake or a stream. Although we don't bathe that often, not nearly as often as you all do. But I have no other undergarments on other than this, which you can imagine at certain times of the month how that can become sort of a problem. So, and with the gentleman here, I won't get into that. But we do have different ways that we deal with it. And so that's always there, and this is something that I would wash quite regularly. There's two things that I wash quite regularly, and for most women, they would always be white, and that's my shift and my day cap here. I have several different day caps. And so the day cap will keep my hat clean. It will also keep my hair clean, or if my hair is getting a little bit more dirty, it won't transfer from one to the other. So the day cap gets washed quite often. My hair does not get washed quite often, except for when I get really hot, and then I like to go down to the river and dump my head in, or pour water over my head. That's the wonderful way of cooling off. I understand you have different ways of cooling off. And my other way of cooling off, where did I put it? Fans are quite popular, and as you might know, this is one, it's made with bamboo. The pieces that look kind of like wood are lacquered bamboo, and then this is just printed or painted paper, and it's got on both sides. Now, I was not raised, as I've mentioned, in a wealthy house, so I did not learn all the rules about using fan, but there are lots of rules about how to flirt across the room with a fan. So fan is not just for cooling off, although it's quite good for that. It's also good for sending a message, particularly to someone from the opposite sex. You know, using it as a flirtatious device. I understand that if you're doing it very quickly, that's kind of like batting your eyes at somebody from across the room. And there are all kinds of rules, but I'm afraid I would send the wrong message, so I'm very careful when I use a fan not to make eye contact with the gentleman that I'm not interested in. And let's see, how are we doing on time? Oh, we're getting... I think did anybody have questions for Abigall Mitchell before we have Gail join us? No? With the
that wooden piece on the front, toward the front.
oh, this.
Yes.
Okay. I brought this to just show you, this is something that you can use in your own house, that it's just a branch of a tree that's got 3 branches off of it, so I can hang my hat on here. I could hang a light jacket on it. If I'm tied this to a rafter or to a nail sticking out of a rafter in my house, I can, very often, if I'm washing the dishes, then I will put the rag that I use on here to dry out. So I just wanted to bring and show you how simple it can be if you wanted to use these kinds of things. Because I know, I've met some people that still use these in your modern day times. So that's what this is. And then, of course, you know what this is, I'm sure. Butter churn, yes, and this is my small butter churn. I have a bigger one when I had lots of family at home. But I brought this just as sort of a reminder to tell you, do you know you do not need a butter churn to make butter? Did you know that? How do you make butter? Yes, if you take the cream and you just shake it, and so I had a delightful time with my grandchildren churning butter, but you don't have to have the churn. You can just have a glass or some sort of jar. A glass jar is kind of nice because then you can see as the butter forms, and you just shake it. And if you're with your grandchildren or other children, you can have them take a time, and people get tired after a little while, and so you pass it on, and eventually the lumps start to form, and it's just quite a delightful process. I understand that you have some sort of magic box that I can never remember the name of, that you can ask questions of and it'll tell you answers. Do you know what I'm speaking of? It's a what? Oh,
A cell phone?
a cell phone? No, but I think computer. That's it. Yes. So a computer, you can ask the computer how to do it and it'll tell you. But I just think I had such a delightful time with my grandmother learning how to make butter and learning how to make cheese. And so I thought I would pass that on to you all, and you can pass it on to your grandchildren or children or whatever is appropriate. Now, if there's nothing else, I'll go get Gail. Yes?
What kind of wood is used for your cup?
For my cup? Oh, for the noggin?
Noggin.
Whatever wood that you can find. A lot of people like the softer wood. You know, one of the soft woods that's pretty good might be basswood, but there's not one particular kind. It depends on where you live and what you have available. Any wood, a real hardwood is going to be hard to carve out, and I don't know that it would be worth the trouble. So I think I would always choose a soft wood. But I am not a carver, so I must confess I have not made these myself. I have been the beneficiary of my son, who is very much my son is very skilled in many of the arts. So, anything else right now? All right, I will go send Gail in, and then you can ask her questions of anything that you would like to know about modern day. Yes?
You didn't tell us how many 9 layers.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. You see, I get distracted. So there's this layer, and then on top of this layer, I've got my stays, which in French they would call that the corset, but mine are called stays. And the fashion of the time wasn't like for some periods of time where a very, 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 very tiny waist was what was desirable. And people who say that, women would draw in their stays so tight that they would faint. In the heat, I could see where I could faint, but mine are not tightly stayed. I haven't pulled mine in very tight. Because you see, my gown is what's called a polonaise, where it's raised here, and I can undo these ribbons and make it drop. But by doing this, it makes my hips look bigger, which makes my waist look smaller. So I don't actually have to have a tiny little waist to do that. And so, no, if I was out without this, I would just look like, a tree trunk. Anything else? Okay. And I know this was scheduled for an hour, and if anybody needs to leave, I completely understand. But if you'd like to stay, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes, for a little while. And I do have my quill and ink. If there's anybody in here who would either like me to write out their name, and I use a script called, what is it called? No, I can't remember. My apologies. It slipped my mind. But it is pretty much the same kind of script that is taught in schools today, the longhand. So most of the letters are going to look the same. And anyone who would like to, if you would like to stay after, I'm happy to write out your name or a relative's name or something if you want to take something home to somebody. But let me go get Gail. She'll be right here. I don't like to be answering questions. I'm Gail, by the way. And I'm the one who created Abigall Mitchell as part of my graduate degree in history education at UW-Platteville. And so out of this, I designed a whole program for teaching kids about this period and learning how to use resources, using primary sources, that kind of thing. Everybody familiar with primary sources? It's the things that were written during the time, not somebody from the 19th century writing about the 18th century, but people who are in the 18th century about their own lives. So I did most of my research through primary sources. So Abigall Mitchell is not a real person, but she is a realistic person because I can document everything about her life that I know, including her great-grandmother, who is somebody that I modeled my great-grandmother off of. And so I like to separate out when I'm talking first person about myself back in 1771 as opposed to answering things about how I got into this or where to find modern, where to find the fabrics nowadays, that kind of thing. So I can separate it so people don't get confused which are you talking about. So now I'm here as my modern day self to answer any questions that you might have. And my apologies, my brain, it was just not working so well today. I kept losing my track. Yeah, I think that must be it. I'm just not dealing too well. I haven't been sleeping so well. I don't have air conditioning in my bedroom. And so I've been sleeping on the couch, which is where their air conditioning is, and I haven't been sleeping that well. But yes.
During your talk, you talked about Albany.
Mm-hmm.
Now, was that present day Albany down here? Or
No,
it
this is
New York?
Albany in the colony of New York.
Yes, all right.
Yes, this would be, you would be hard pressed to find any European women in this area of the country. You would find men because they're adventuring or fur traders or exploring for possible, taking over the country. But the frontier actually runs just west of Albany, where the end of civilization kind of is there. And so everything out this way, it's now under control of the British since what we would modern day call the French and Indian War. But that doesn't mean the French weren't there. The French still occupied a lot of that territory, even though they were supposed to leave. So, other things.
Well, I would just like to say that both Abigail and Gail are just amazing. And do not apologize for those blanks, because I have a feeling if you did a survey, you would find that it is actually quite common.
I believe they're called senior moments.
But you've just done an amazing job. I mean, it's so interesting and things that you brought. This has just been wonderful.
Thank you very much.
And that doesn't mean I don't mean to end anything, I'm just saying, I just needed to say that.
And
Before I forget.
when I started this off, instead of coming out to places like this, I typically used to do 10 to 15 camps a year where we would set up camps with authentic period tents and things like that. And at these camps, unlike, you might have been to a Civil War reenactment before. Those are usually reenactments where they're reenacting some specific battle and they portray real people, that kind of thing. Most of the events I go to, which are historic, they might include Civil War, but they don't focus on Civil War. And most of the events are kind of a timeline where people represent times from before colonization. We do have some people that portray natives going way back. Or there are people that portray French and Indian. A lot of them are military based, and I didn't want to do that. But there are other people that do things like I do. There are artists of the period. There are surveyors of the period. And so when I do that, we're kind of going you set up usually on Thursday, and Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you see thousands and thousands of people. And so that's when I'm more into, I've got all the things in my mind because they're fresh. Now I haven't done it since last year because I'm getting too old to be setting up all this stuff. So I don't go to and set up camps anymore. So I'm not doing the 10 to 15 a year. Although I did have the opportunity to go to Puerto Rico and Fort Niagara because of this hobby to do reenactment. Those were true reenactments. But mostly when we're around here, we do living history, just talking about life ways, our lives, that we're not reenacting a specific event. We're just trying to capture what life is like for an average person of whoever I'm portraying at this time period. Yes?
What do you use a metal can there?
This one this is a great one. Has anybody ever heard of syllabub? Syllabub is a very popular, I don't know whether to call it a drink or a dessert. It kind of goes in both categories. And it's usually got heavy cream, and usually most of the recipes have a lot of lemon in them. Some of them have wine, some of them have other alcohols in them. And this is a syllabub maker. It works very much like the butter churn, and it has, and so it's just this, and then this is the bottom. Instead of like this one for churning butter, it's like this. But it's the same thing where you churn it. You put all the ingredients in here, you churn it, and then you pour it out, and you let it sit overnight in a chilled space, and it kind of separates where the wine alcohol liquid is on the bottom, and then it becomes more of a solid on the top with the cream. And so whenever I eat it with a spoon, where I dip down and get a little bit of the liquid and a little bit of the cream. It's very popular. If you ever go to Colonial Williamsburg, they serve syllabub there. Or if you ever, well, I don't know if I ever make syllabub anymore. But what I was starting to get to is in the weekend after Labor Day, in Platteville is always Dairy Days. They always have this big community celebration. Part of Dairy Days, they do have an encampment. It's totally free. This is a timeline encampment, so they have people from all different periods. But if you would like to come see more, and there's a lot of different kinds of people, I think that I'm the only one at this camp that does first person. Most people do it third person, talking about this is what they did and that kind of thing. But it's still pretty interesting. So if you want to come out and join us, I always recommend Fridays, always school days. So we have thousands of children coming. But those are good days because everybody's got their presentation. And so they have a specific thing that they do. And at Platteville, they try to make sure they've got a variety of things and not everybody's doing how to start fires, you know, that kind of thing. And so I'm the only one that does the writing and reading kinds of demonstration there. But please do feel free to come, bring relatives, you know. It's free and it's kind of a nice day out, and you can participate in all sorts of other Dairy Days. And if you get to town and you forget where it is, it's at the, what's the name of the park? Mound View Park, I think it is. It's the park that's right across the street from the bus parking at the high school. But anybody in town, if you just ask where the historic encampment is, they can tell you. I recommend coming on Fridays for the presentation, but then you'll have a lot of kids around as well. Or if you come on Saturdays, that's a good day. It's a lot lower key, and some of the people are not as actively demonstrating. If you ask questions, they'll answer them, but they'll just kind of sit there and let you walk by unless you stop and start. Not me. I'm always, come on over, let me talk to you. And so please do feel free to come to that. I believe this is the 24th year of it, something like that. And I started with it in 2014.
Wow.
So it's been a while. So this is syllabub. And if I had all the ingredients, because I did get this so I could make it, and I have made it many times. And it is quite delicious. Oh, if you do go to Colonial Williamsburg, and you know you want syllabub, because they don't make it every day, I can't remember which. Any of the taverns or restaurants there should be able to tell you, but there's one that specifically makes syllabub. So you can always check in and say, are you making syllabub today? And if so, you can ask them to save one for you, because very often they'll run out very quickly because they don't make a whole lot of it. So, anything else? And anybody?
You're welcome. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes.
You're
How do
welcome.
you spell syllabub?
It's just like syllabus, only it's B-U-B instead of B-U-S.
All right.
Oh, and anybody who would like, oh no, I didn't bring them. Okay, never mind. I was going to ask you. I printed them out this morning at home. I had little evaluations for anybody who wanted to contribute to my evaluation. I'm no longer doing the encampments except for the one at Platteville. I always do that one because it's my very favorite. But what are you talking about back there?
That's the book I was looking for.
Oh. I forgot what I was saying. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. But anybody who would like a card written out with quill and ink, feel free to come on up here and I will write out one for you. And thank you all for coming very much.